6th December 2023. Can I remind you that the meeting is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the Comhairle's website following the meeting. Item number 1 on today's agenda is the minute of the meeting of the 26th of September this year, and that is there for your approval. Do members approve? Thank you. Item number 2, declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they may have in any items of the agenda. It would be helpful if members explained why they are declaring an interest in the item concerned. Any motion or amendment in relation to a planning application must be based solely on the planning reasons. If a member moves an amendment, the Chair will invite him or her to clearly articulate the amendment and the planning reasons upon which it is based. Thereafter, the Chair may, at his discretion, continue the business of the meeting in accordance with the time-out protocol. Planning Manager for the Development Management Team will present the recommendation of officers. In the event of a member seeking to move an amendment, the Chair may call upon the legal advisor of the planning advisors to the board to give advice. Moving on to item 3 on the agenda, this is to erect church building with associated access and car parking, install air source heat pump, erect gardener's shed and install play area at Stainish, Isle of Lewis. This planning application has received more than 6 valid representations that raise material planning considerations and is therefore presented to the board for a decision. And can I now invite Morag Ferguson to speak to this report? Oh.
I'd like to declare an interest in this planning application. Reluctantly, I attend this church. I am neither a member nor an office bearer in any way, shape or form, but rather than damage the integrity of any decision taken in this chamber, I will reluctantly withdraw.
Thank you for that, Councillor Murray. Is that noted? Okay. Okay, now can I invite Morag Ferguson to speak to this report at item 3?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. This is a planning application for the erection of a church building with associated access and car park, and to install an air source heat pump and some auxiliary accommodation in the form of a gardener shed and play area at Stainish on the Isle of Lewis. That would be useful just to kind of, before we get into the application itself, just to kind of highlight that the applicant for this application is Neil Mackay and Co. And the agent is McLean Project Services. The application has been with us since April of this year. The application is brought before the committee because there has been quite a lot of community interest and concern raised. So Sandwick Community Council, in their capacity as a consultee, have raised representations, and their representations are set out in full in Appendix 3A to the report. A local elected member has also raised representations on behalf of his constituents. 26 other contributors raised representations within the statutory consultation period, and there were 4 additional representations that were made to the Community Council and submitted along with the Community Council's consultation response. The representations are set out in Appendix 4. And it's also worth noting that apart from Sandwick Community Council, none of the other consultees raised significant concerns or an objection to the application. This next slide just is an aerial of Stainish, just to provide some context for those members who may be less familiar with the area. So on the bottom left of the slide there, you see the town of Stornoway. You can see Goat Island, and if you take the basically the road that would go out towards the airport, you can see the airport, the runway on the right hand side of the slide there. So if you were to be leaving Stornoway heading towards Point and Sandwick, you would go through the roundabout at Enge's petrol station, and at the next junction you turn left up towards Plasterfield, and the township of Stainish is on the headland to the to the west of the airport. The next slide is, if you can ignore the dots on it, it's a slide that I've just kind of made up myself just because it gives slightly better context. So in the centre of the slide, you'll see an area which I've marked purple, and that is the actual application site. To the left of that, there is the Lewis and Harris auction mart, and that site has the auction mart building and an extensive area of hard standing where the cattle and sheep pens are. If you look to the top right of the slide, you'll see the traditional village of Stanish. It's all part of Stanish Township, but the crofts on the headland are very typical of the settlement pattern in Lewis, where they're like long narrow crofts running from the road to the shore, with most of the buildings very close to the road, and that's on both sides of the road. As you move out of the village onto Simon's Road, then the crofts there were in larger parcels, and indeed this forms part of quite a large croft. As you move towards Plasterfield, there is like a housing development and a care home at the far end of the road as you move closer to the town. Can go to the next slide. Again, the slide is just one I've kind of mocked up myself because it just provides like a bit of detail. So bottom right, you can see the auction mart and the hard standing and pens, and the field just past going towards the village. The field just past that is the field where the development is proposed. And you'll see, like I've marked on centrally, so there would be a new access proposed in a central position coming into that, where the dot is, where the car park would be quite a large car park to the roadside. And then I've kind of like sketched on where the footprint of the church building itself would be. Now the front of the church would basically be behind the back, the building, the rear building line of the auction mart, if you like. So the church is proposed to be set back further from the road than the auction mart. This is the site location plan that was submitted with the application, and it kind of indicates the extent of the application site. So what you would have here is the area for development. There's a small area where a gate would take you through to the auction mart, and there is the kind of long narrow strip is for the connection to the drainage system. So I take you on to the next slide, which is actually quite a busy slide. Again, this was submitted as part of the application, and it's the engineer's drawing. So on this, you can see again, if I just bottom left, you'll see the auction mart building. It's outlined in red. And then you can see in yellow, in the kind of dark yellow colour, is the proposed church building to the right, and then the car park to the front of the building. And then there would be the access that I mentioned created centrally within that, and the road would also be widened at that point along the frontage of the site. So the road would be widened to 6 metres with a pavement just along the site frontage. This just provides a kind of just zoomed in version of that. So again, you can see the bell mouth where the road is proposed for widening, the access, the extent of the car park. There would be like a bank of planting just midway through the car park, just to try and break up the mass of the area, if you like. As you come up towards the proposed building, there would be electrical vehicle charging points and disabled car parking. The access into the building would be on the northeast corner, on the right, just here, yeah. So and then there's an annex at the front. I think actually maybe got better floor. I think I've got a floor plan of that actually, so maybe to leave that. But the entrance would come in on that corner. So go to the next slide. So the main entrance into the building would be top left of your slides. There is a annex or a kind of like reception area, quite a large area where you would come in through the double doors into, and then the main church building itself, the main part of the church, which is the tall part of the building, the sanctuary or the nave, with the seating laid out. And then on both sides and both wings, if you like, there is toilet accommodation, and then there are some other meeting rooms, prayer rooms, and a small kitchen on the in the entrance area. So these are the plans of the proposed church. It's quite a substantial building. So the actual church itself would be over 10.3 metres high, so it would be 10.3 metres high measured from the floor level. In terms of external appearance, it has like a very large roofscape. There will be a bank of solar panels in the southwest elevation. The annex, or the kind of entrance section to the church, would be slightly lower than the main part of the church, and would have a glazed area, and there would be like some grey panelling above that area. So this, we had asked the applicant to provide us with a slide that would just kind of illustrate the difference in mass between the neighbouring Mart building and the church, just to give a sense of scale. So the church ridge height, as I said, I mean, these are levels, so the 20.7 is relative to a datum, the finished floor level is 10.4. So the difference between the floor level and the ridge would be 10.3 metres high. At the Mart, the same. The figures there are relative to one another, so the Mart is 6.3 metres high to the ridge from inside floor level. So looking at it in the distance, the church ridge will be 4.1 metres above the height of the Auction Mart ridge. The annex to the church building, so that's the lower section, would be 2 metres higher than the Auction Mart ridge. And the finished floor level of the church is 300 millimetres higher, because the ground is slightly more raised as you move further back on the site. So it just gives you a comparison. Now that's kind of looking from the housing, if you like, if you're leaving the village of Steinish and you're heading towards Constable Road, that's the kind of view that you would see. So it's that side of the building. So just to kind of let members understand the scale. So this is a cross section that was provided by the applicant, and it illustrates that the internal ceiling height of the sanctuary or the nave would be 7 metres high, and in the two wings, if you like, there would be a stair in each side that would take you up to a storage area in the eaves on both sides. There were a lot of, a number of representations to the application, and not all those were on planning grounds, and that's fairly, you can appreciate that, because it's often very difficult for the public to understand just the full how the planning system operates and what it can and can't take into account. So this slide really just illustrates the matters that have to be disregarded in taking a decision. So the first one is moral or ideological considerations. The second is who the applicant is or who the end user is. What the planning system has to assess is the proposal to erect a building that's going to be used as a church for a congregation. You can't have regard to who the applicant or the user is. The other thing is that it's not, there were a number of representations where people who were supportive of a new church being built felt that it wasn't the right location and had suggested other buildings and use of buildings held by other congregations. And again, it's not a matter that can be taken into account in determining this planning application. It has to be looked at on its own merits on the site for which it's proposed. The other thing that can't be taken into account is the need for any development. The need for it is a matter for the developer. It's not for the planning system to decide whether something is needed or not in this kind of situation. So if it was a community wanted to build a community hall, whether there's a need for it or not, that's a matter for the community. Also, the prospect of better locations or better proposals, we can't take that into account. And then there is like a volume of local opposition to this, but what has to be considered is the issues that are raised rather than the volume of opposition. And the other thing that's not relevant is matters that are controlled under other legislation. In this case, there would be a requirement for a building warrant, there would be a requirement for roads construction consent administered by the Roads Department, which deals with the kind of finer details of any road alteration to a road that is an adopted road. So that would be like marking, signage, that kind of finer detail that would be required of the developer. There's a separate process for that. So the report sets out the issues, but it's useful just to summarise them here. So the kind of key issues here are the principle of development of this proposed site in Straneish for a church building. And there are kind of two aspects to the principle of development now that national planning framework became into being on the 14th of February this year. So in terms of the Comhairle's own local development plan, Straneish is within a rural settlement. Straneish is within in terms of NPF4, Scottish Government's urban rural classification, six-fold map. It is classed as a remote rural area. I'll speak later in the report. When we looked at this originally, it had been classed as being part of the remote small town. We've satisfied ourselves that that's not the case. So this assessment is carried out on the basis that the proposal is within a remote rural area. The other key issues are the siting of the church and siting of the car park on the actual application site, the scale, the massing and the design of the church building, the extent and appearance of the associated car parking, the impact on crofting arising from the removal of the site from a croft or from crofting use, the suitability of the access to the site and its impacts on road safety, the impact of the development on the kind of wider road network, so Simons Road, Constable Road, Percival Road, and the kind of wider road network, impact of the development on the character and settlement pattern of Straneish as a rural settlement, impact on the residential amenity of existing residences in Straneish, the impact of the development on climate change and on biodiversity. So I'll maybe just talk very briefly to this because it has been raised in some detail in the Sandwich Community Council's representation, and that was very useful for us to go back to the government to seek clarification as to how Straneish was to be classified. So Straneish is within this data zone S0 100 9045, and it was certainly our understanding from the guidance that we had been given by government that these particular data zones were to be classed as part of the remote small town category. The mapping that was provided was at a scale where it wasn't definitive, and it's always been the case that where there's a discrepancy between the mapping and other written advice, that the written advice takes precedence. Now, on the back of the Community Council highlighting their legitimate concerns that Straneish had been made a part of a town without any consultation. We went back to the government, not once but twice, and the government looked at the data, and they did, on the second communication with them, confirm that indeed the interpretation of the Community Council was right. And you can see, like on the headland, that although this Stanish is within that data zone, the actual village of Stanish itself is out with the classification for the town, and it is classed as it always was, a rural area. So the assessment that you have before you, on the report you have before you, is based on the fact that it is a remote rural area, and the assessment and the policies have been updated to reflect that. So coming to the assessment of the planning application, needs to be assessed against the development plan and material considerations. And the development plan of the Comhairle now comprises of the local development plan that came through the council in 2018 and National Planning Framework 4, which is the national statement of planning policy that now forms part of the statutory development plan. So whether the determination of the application and whether it satisfies the development plans depends on the assessment of the locational policies on rural settlement and remote rural, and on a range of other matters to be tested through the other relevant policies in the development plan, and the weight that's afforded by the decision maker to the various policy issues. And that weight can vary, the weight can change depending on on the decision maker's view. So the key kind of policy issues to have that flow from the locational or the development strategy are the impact upon the croft, the impact on the road network, the suitability of the site access, what the environmental impacts are, the siting design, contribution to placemaking, impact on the settlement, and how the proposal might support and sustain a local community or local employment and local employment. So the first consideration was, would it have an adverse impact on the croft in terms of the policy tests? So this site is part of Croft 13, and it's not easy to see on the map, but basically the red square in the centre, or the red rectangle in the centre, is the land that was removed for the auction mart some years ago, and the application site is the parcel of land immediately to the right of that. So this croft is unusually for use, a 16 hectare croft. So it's a large croft when compared to most crofts in Stanish and indeed in most of rural areas. So the removal of the application site, which would extend to 0.8 of a hectare from the overall area, is such that in our view it wouldn't be harmful to the sustainability of that croft. That croft could still function as a croft, and adequate access would remain for the remainder of that croft. We then looked at the siting of the church, and the proposed church building would have a large footprint. It would be set back from the rear of the building line of the mart, and it would be well back from the edge of Simon's Road, with the large car park area to the front. And as I'd said, when we looked at the slide, there would be a proposal for a central bank of planting midway through the car park. Now, it would be on a plot of land which is it's still within the kind of crofting settlement of Stanish, but it's kind of out with the traditional core of the village where the narrow crofts predominate. And it's our view that the established settlement pattern of the village would not be significantly altered. Further, while the crofting landscape character within the site would be altered, overall, looking at the kind of wider landscape character of the area, again, we assess that that would not be compromised overall. And in terms of the intervening distance between the siting of the proposed church and car park and the houses in the village, in terms of like overshadowing, impact on privacy, we also assess that it wouldn't compromise community residential amenity. So then moving on to the impact on the road network, as is standard in applications that will have an effect on an adopted road. We carried out a consultation with our own road section, and they provided consultation advice, which is set out in detail in the report. Following receipt of the representations from Sandwich Community Council, who have significant concerns over the capacity and safety of the road, we asked roads colleagues to have another look and to provide us with just a bit more detail on how their advice was arrived at. So they, as professionals, have their own way of calculating an objective approach to the assessment of roads. So they've looked at the vehicle movement figures on the road. So they've combined a historic traffic survey that was carried out in 2010 by the council itself, and then survey data that is obtained annually by the Department of Transport. And in the table to the right there, you'll see that the data is 2018, 2019, it was estimated, and then 2020, 2021, 2022. And it gives you, it's broken down by volume of cars, buses, light vehicles, heavy goods, and then all motor vehicles. So you can see, like on the right-hand column, for the last 3 years, the figures from the Department of Transport were 489, 484, 509, so round about 500, give or take, as the kind of traffic flow. And that kind of correlates with the data that Roads Department gathered themselves in 2010. So I won't read out the whole of this slide. Sorry, Fiona, if you could go to the next slide. So this kind of just provides like a bit more detail, and I'll let you read it through rather than me reading it for you. So furthermore, there was a review carried out of historic accident data. So there's a national mapping base for that. So there was one incident that was recorded, but non-injury incidents aren't recorded on that, and local records indicated that there was 2 minor non-injury incidents reported over the past 2 years. So in conclusion, our colleagues in Roads' advice was that, provided that the design of the junction was and the tie-in layout and the pedestrian access provision that's proposed, that the traffic volume, that Simons Road has the capacity to accommodate the level of traffic that's expected to be generated. So, as I said, Sandwich Community Council is a consultee on account of their view that the proposed development would have an adverse impact on the amenity of the Community Council area. And in their consultation and in many third-party representations, they raised concerns regarding the capacity and safety implications arising from the proposed development. As officers in the planning assessment, which is set out in your report, we have placed due weight on the specialist advice of the Comhairle Roads section that, subject to the standard access design details, proposed widening improvements that form part of the application, So that with the widening of the road over 50 metres along the site frontage and the provision of off-road car parking proposed, and subject to the kind of details that would be exercised through roads construction consent, that the road has capacity for the additional traffic movements that would likely to be generated in the course of normal use of the building for services of worship on the Sunday. So the next consideration is the building design, the contribution it would make to placemaking, the impact on the crofting character and on the settlement pattern. Nowadays, there is a very increased focus on placemaking and placemaking principles, and both national and local policy seek that development proposals are designed to improve the quality of an area. The design of the building in our view as planners is functional, but it's not of strong architectural merit, and it would not, in terms of its design scale, contribute positively to placemaking. In particular, the height of the building, the large mass, large roofscape would detract from the contribution it would make to placemaking. However, in mitigation, it is a church building, and churches have historically and typically been dominant structures within both rural villages and towns. And there are examples of similar large, tall buildings elsewhere in rural areas. However, it's our view that the scale and the aspects of the design would not be compliant with the design and placemaking ambitions of the development plan. So sorry, so I didn't address the other 2 points that were on the heading on that slide. So impact on crofting landscape, I've already actually mentioned, and impact on settlement pattern again. The view is that it would not alter the settlement pattern of the settlement. So we go to the next.
Is that because we've jumped back a slide?
Okay, members, we'll adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes until we rectify the IT matter. Okay. I hereby reconvene the meeting. Back to you, Morag.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the other policy area that needs to be assessed is the environmental impact, global climate change and impact on biodiversity. So it is a reality that all new construction will, to some degree, have an impact on the environment. And nowadays during construction stage, it's mitigated by site waste management plans to mitigate construction waste, and during operation by having like a basically like a recycling system for different types of waste. In terms of construction of a new building itself, it has to meet current building standards. So any proposed new building has to be highly insulated and meet the standards that are set and tested through the building warranty process. The proposal is to incorporate air source heating and solar panels on the roof as low carbon technologies. There is a move towards having development accessible by public transport and walking, wheeling, cycling. And it's our view that the proposed development on Simons Road is sufficiently close to the Constable Road, Percival Road bus route to ensure that public transport could be used ordinarily. But it has to be acknowledged that travel into the village by car will result in fuel emissions, and that's contrary to current policy ambitions. Again, in mitigation in these particular circumstances, I understand there's limited public transport on a Sunday, and also that, I mean, weather conditions means that in terms of accessibility for all, it's not always walking, wheeling and cycling are not always credible transport options for all users of a community facility. In terms of biodiversity, we would be seeking for some biodiversity gain. At the moment, it's an area of ground that's been used for sheep grazing. It's not of high biodiversity value, but we would be looking for measures to be introduced that would enhance biodiversity in the form of, trees, flowering plants, and that, nature of development that would be nature of measure that would improve biodiversity. So the other policy test that we look at is how the proposal might support and sustain a local community and support local employment. So in terms of local employment, the nature of the use is such that any kind of community use is unlikely to generate long-term employment opportunities of note, but the construction phase of the development could support some local employment in the construction industry. And in terms of sustaining a local community, there are different views, but a church in terms of planning is classed as a community building in that it serves a community of interest, and it would meet the test that the proposed use would support and sustain a community. And I'll just take members through some photos of the site. So this photo is taken, the village of Stainish, the main part of the village of Stainish is behind us when this photo was taken. The site is on your left. The auction mart is in the slightly, you can't see it. It's kind of masked against the landscape. And the site on the right is currently under development with quite a large house. You can see the road sign, the keep left road sign there. So the next picture is it's taken having walked past the mart back towards Constable Road, and it's looking towards the village of Stainish. The mart's on your right, where you see these high bushes. The entrance to the proposed site will be just beyond that, and the new house on the left is actually a manse that was built a couple of years ago. So this is taken from that same point beyond the mart looking towards the houses that are, there's a few single houses on this part of Simons Road, and then when you go beyond this you get to the Redburn development and to the care home. So this next slide is, again, you're looking down towards the auction mart, and you're closer to the village here, and you can see there are rumble strips on the road and a passing place. The the application site. You can see the white building to the right is where that new house, which is now a manse. So obviously as you enter the village, there is traffic calming measures there at present. So the application site is on the left-hand side. So this photo is taken at the entrance to where the site would be. So you can see the fresh hardcore on the left. That's a house that's currently under construction. And the application site is opposite, just where you see the gorse bushes there. Now that section of road will be wide. It's a 50-metre frontage to the site, and it will be widened to 6 metres width with a footpath. This photo was taken from the same spot as the previous photo, and you're looking again out of the village towards Constable Road. So new house being built on the right, application site on the left. And then this is you going back towards the village again, and you can see there's a slow sign on the road. There's a footway marked by a white line, and then you can see the traffic calming measures just in the distance further on. Sorry, I should have made this photo slightly bigger, but this is a photo looking over Tonks Haltings, on the site where the new house is currently under construction. And you can see just where the puddle is on the right, that's the access into the second part of the mart. So this photo was taken from having driven in the main entrance to the mart. So you can see like it's all concreted. So from this position, the kind of road in front of the building is taking you up to the large stock pens up at the top, and some car parking. So the building would effectively be set behind this building from this position. So it would be taller than the building, but it would kind of appear behind it. Okay, so the presentation is not a substitute for the report, which members have had the opportunity to review. The presentation is really to present some of the key points which are set out in detail in the planning report and in the appendices. So the report itself, the first part of the report is a executive summary, and then there are some other sections that are more for internal purposes. Section 5 sets out the background to the application and the planning history of the application that was an application that was formally refused for a builder's yard on the site. Section 6 sets out just the context to the site and the actual proposed development. Section 7 is the legislation that's relevant. Section 8 gives you the planning history of the application that was formally refused. Section 9 sets out a summary of the consultation advice, and that is set out in full in Appendix 3A and 3A, in 3 and 3A. The road's further comments on the consultation response of the Sandra Community Council, that's in 3A, were provided for you in this slideshow. Section 10 sets out the public participation. Section 11 sets out the policies that were relevant. And Section 12 contains the bulk of the report, which is the planning assessment. And that's brought together the policy context, the consultation advice that we received, public comments that were received, the assessment of each of these policy issues. It also considers the material planning consideration, and it sets out the other matters, which is the explanation of the NPF4 rural sixfold classification. And there's also a summary of these issues that we covered on the slide that are non-material to a planning decision. And then Section 13 sets out the officer's recent conclusion that has underpinned the recommendation. So in addition to the actual main body of the report, there are a series of appendices. So a schedule of proposed conditions is set out in Appendix 1. Plans are set out in Appendix 2. The detailed consultation responses in 3A. The consultation responses handled by Community Council is reproduced in full in 3A. Appendix 4 sets out a summary of the representations, and Appendix 5 is a response which was received from the likely end user to the representations that were submitted. So, in conclusion, in planning and policy terms, the proposed development of a new church building and the use of the croftland in this location for the development of a new church building is, from a development plan perspective, considered to be acceptable on a number of counts, but it does fail in some limited respects. We've weighed up the policy considerations in a planning balance, and it's our view that the proposed development would not wholly meet the development strategy of the local development plan as further referenced within National Planning Framework 4. However, when we take the development plan and read it as a whole, the two matters that weigh against the proposal, in our view, were scale, height and massing of the building and the generation of car traffic and resultant CO2 emissions. But we did recognise that there were mitigating factors and circumstances which I've kind of, again, covered in the presentation. So it's our conclusion, while it's not wholly compliant with the development plan, that on balance the development should be approved, and we've set out a schedule of conditions in Appendix 1 to the report. That's the end of the presentation. So take any questions. Fiona, I don't know whether you want to take the presentation back to the second or third slide.
Thank you, Mrs. Ferguson, and your department for that very extensive and informative report. I wish now to, before we move to formal proceedings, board members, I understand that Councillor McCormack wishes to speak to the board. Now, as a local member, I will bring you in at this stage before this board moves to formal proceedings. Okay, Councillor McCormack, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak here. Thank you very much. I am the local councillor for Stainish. I have been since 2003. It is an area that I know very well, indeed, and I am here to represent the views of the overwhelming views of the people of Stainish. Which is that they are in opposition to this development. They're not in any way opposed to the building of a church, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. I would like, first of all, to bring to your attention something that has been mentioned by the planning officer. In the first report that came to this committee, to the planning board, which you didn't in fact discuss because the matter was taken off the agenda. In that report, there was quite a bit of emphasis placed on the fact that Stainish was now part of Stornoway. I must admit, I and the people in Stainish were astounded at that suggestion. And so the Community Council objected to that. And now the planning department accept that it is in fact in a rural area, and we're very happy about that. What troubles me a little bit about that is that despite the fact that on one occasion it was in a town and on the other occasion it's in a rural area, it is nonetheless, it was recommended for approval in both situations. And I really, really do not see how that works out. I just can't follow that at all. I just mentioned that in passing. I think that was NFP4 I'm referring to there, although I'm not all that great on the jargon and such like. I would also like to make what I believe to be a correction to this report. There's a lot of reference made to Simon's Road. Now, to my understanding, Raj Sheem is a small section of roadway starting at Moss End Corner and finishing at the end of the Barrett houses. From then on, it is Stainish, and it is Stainish Road. So, in my view, this is an inaccuracy in this report. The report, right the way through the report, keep talking about this development being on Simon's Road. It's not on Simon's Road. I have here the list of electors for the area. Simons Road has got addresses up to number 10, and the area where this development is taking place is in the village of Stainish. We call it Stainish Road colloquially. These are just 2 points I wanted to make because I think we really do need to get the facts right. There are 3 organisations within the Stainish area that are relevant here. There is the Community Council, from which you have already heard. There is the Moss End Residents Association, and there is the Stainish Development Group. All 3 of these organisations have met to discuss this development. All 3 of these organisations have come out in opposition to this development. The 2 principal points that have been brought to my attention again and again and again. One is whether or not this building is in keeping with a rural crofting village. And it is their view that it is not. It is not appropriate to build a building of such mass and indeed not a very attractive building, I would have to say, rather bland, in the village, where the overwhelming what's the word I'm looking for? Why do words disappear from my head? The overwhelming situation in the village is residential and crofting. And not a lot has been made by the planning department about the refusal, which happened some time ago, a couple of years ago, where a builder's yard was refused, largely on the basis of mass and on the basis of the fact that it wasn't in keeping with the crofting community. Well, I think this building is in exactly the same category. It just does not fit with Stainish village in any way, shape or form. You will have noticed from some of the slides that new buildings are being built along the Stainish Road. These are homes, and there is no objections from Stainish villagers to homes being built along the Stainish Road, none whatsoever. And that is what they would like to see. So it is the view of the people of Stainish that they are very much opposed to this building because of its mass and because it is out of keeping with the general tenor of development in the area. I would say too that amongst those who are objecting to this are people who are members of this church, who live in Stainish, and they object to the fact that this building is to be built in Stainish. There is no way that the church of itself, who are putting this forward, is unanimous in its support for this particular site. I just make that point in passing. The second issue, which is of note, and the planning department have dealt with this in some detail in conjunction with discussion with our roads department. I think I was in post in 2003 for a week before I had my first complaint about the road in Stainish. And I've had complaints about that road every year since. And I've done my best to get bits and pieces done. The first thing that I managed to get done was I got additional lighting put in, because the lighting at the time was very, very poor and people were very unhappy about having to walk in the dark. Then I got the white line drawn. I wanted a pavement, of course, but I couldn't have a pavement, but I could have a white line. I must admit, I'm not at all convinced that the white line separates people from vehicles. It's not my experience, certainly. The rumble strips, again, these are things that the roads department put in at my instigation. And they also put up quite a bit of signage as you enter what we call Stanish Road. There is a big sign there which this council erected which says Stanish, and that's the beginning of Stanish Village. It's not Simon's Road. Now these are all welcome, these additions to safety on the site, but they don't actually make it any safer. I mean, I walk that road regularly myself, and the people from the area walk it, and now that there's a path at the seafront, there are even more people walking there. It is not a good road to walk on. There are times when you have to get off the road completely when a vehicle is coming along, if it's a fairly substantial vehicle. That's what you have to do. It's not a good road, Chair, at all. And it's all very well, you know, to come out with statistics about this, that, and the other, and traffic movements. But it only needs one car to hit you to be a problem for you. And it's not a good road in any shape or form. And I still this year, I continue to get messages from people telling me of issues with the road and how they've just missed being hit by a car or whatever. It happens all the time, constantly. At one time, when Donald McRae was still in office, he and I discussed the possibility of having a chicane put into the road. It's a straight road, you see, and when people see straight roads, they put their foot down. He suggested a chicane, and we looked into it. I even had plans drawn for it at the time, not by me, I mean, but by the department. But of course, there was no chicane ever built because there's no money in this council to build anything. And that is why the road remains as is. My view is, and the view of the vast majority, I mean, in fact, nobody at all has come to me and said this is a good idea, having this building built. So the two reasons why I think it should not be built are, one, because the road is insecure, and two, because the mass of the building does not in any way in keeping with the development of Stanish. I would like to make reference to one other thing too. Sandwich Community Council has been in touch with the council because it is interested in developing a local place plan, which means that the local people would sit down with the council and decide how they would like their local area to be developed. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been any reaction from the council to date.
1 minute, Councillor McCormack.
I beg your pardon?
1 minute left.
Thank you, Chair. And that disappoints me, because when a local community and a community council, formally consulted, suggests that it wants to have a local place plan, it is usually the case that all development ceases until such time as the local place plan is agreed. And that hasn't happened. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you for those comments, Councillor McCormack. We'll now move into the formal procedure of this board meeting. Can I ask if members of the board have any questions or comments relating to this application? Councillor Susan Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted a bit of clarity around about the traffic situation. You mentioned in the report and in the presentation about a previous planning application that was rejected on the basis of the traffic flows, and I just wondered, how does that planning decision relate to this one?
Mrs. Ferguson.
Okay, each planning application has to be considered on its own merits. The previous planning application on the site, and it's identified within the report, was for a builder's yard, local contractors who wish to move their operations from the industrial estate here to a site there. So it would have involved traffic of some heavy goods traffic. So there would be like lorries, diggers being moved back and forth, and it would also involve contractors' vans coming into the village early, morning to start at 8 o'clock and leaving again at the end of the day. So there was a kind of traffic profile, if you like, that would be of concern, given that it would clash with when people were leaving for work and when children were going to school. So it was considered legitimate that the road did not have capacity for that nature of traffic. The nature of traffic for this proposal, while there would be obviously like construction traffic during a build period, which would be similar to that nature of traffic, in terms of operation, most of the traffic would be domestic vehicles. So that has a bearing on the assessment. So it's not irrelevant, but the use and the proposal are quite different and has to be looked at on its own merits.
Thank you, that's helpful. And just one other question
Yes.
on traffic again, or on roads. The proposals to widen the road to 6 metres and then put in a footpath. Is that a footpath as in a pavement, or is that just the white line again with the space to walk?
It would be a pavement, but it would be on the opposite side of the road, so it would be within the application site, if you like. So at the moment, the white lined area is on the opposite side of the road. So it would just give people coming, out of a vehicle at the entrance, it would mean that they would step onto pavement. So it doesn't, and it is only for the width of the actual site.
That's great, thanks very much.
Happy with that?
Absolutely, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Councillor Ian Macaulay.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Morgan Department, for the, as usual, very concise report. It's really the road issue I would like to ask some questions on. I note from, I just don't feel that it's perhaps been looked at in as much detail as I would have liked. But on 12:45, it's not the time, not lunchtime. The road is, it says the road is proposed to be widened to 6 metres for a 50-metre stretch along the site frontage. The council road section has commented and advised that this arrangement would be sufficient in allowing adequate passing space for shared road users along the stretch of Simons Road. It's actually something that was highlighted by the applications and by the applicants themselves, in that they were willing to change the times of their services so they don't coincide with people from Stanish wishing to go to their own services. So they've obviously recognised an issue with traffic that hasn't been mentioned by our own roads department. Our own roads department seem to be satisfied by this 50-metre stretch, which is basically about the size of the croft, I would imagine. I don't know the, but what the applicant seemed to highlight it here, which was foremost in my mind, is we're talking about a lot of traffic, up to 90 cars for a half-hour space, twice, if not more, on a Sunday, all going in the same direction. And just by having a slightly wider road outside the church, I mean, I noticed it was very well, my point is very well made in one of your photos, I think one of the first photos you've had there. If we're going to have up to 90 cars all going in the one direction between the church there right out to the main road, going to church and then coming back to church a wee while later, would that not cause quite a lot of congestion? People being stuck on one side or the other? And I just don't feel that that part of the road is suitable for that level of traffic. It's different to the one that you just mentioned before, you mentioned, yes, they recognised on the previous decision there was going to be traffic at 8 in the morning and at nights and heavy traffic. This is a congestion, but of a different sort. And the fact that really gets me is the applicant has recognised this, and they're simply going to move it to another time, which is just going to presumably inconvenience or make it less safe for other users coming in and out of Stainish. And I just wondered, I don't know if I've got a question at the end of all this, but has that been taken into consideration? And how I just wondered how, we can't really ask the council traffic people now how they feel about this, but I just feel it's something maybe has been overlooked.
Thank you,
Just
Councillor
wonder how your
Macaulay.
comments were.
I see Mr McKeever from Roads is actually in the chamber just now, so I'll bring him in, and maybe Mrs Ferguson if she wishes to comment after his response.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we did consider that the way the traffic will flow in and out of the site. We were looking at, say, a 45-minute window before and after services. So if you're looking at a 90 vehicle capacity car park, on average, that's 2 vehicles per minute. Admittedly, that wouldn't be the way that the traffic would flow. There would be a short period where there would be a peak, but that would probably be in the region of 4 to 5 vehicles per minute for that shorter period. So we felt that on balance, it was still, with the mitigation measures they were putting in place with the widening, there would be sufficient gaps in the flow to allow traffic to move past without too much inconvenience. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Can I bring in Mrs Ferguson now?
Yes, Chair, I'd just like to remind members that we can't take into account who the end users would be, or commitments that are made in terms of how they would use the building. If the building were to be consented as a church, then planning couldn't control when somebody would come and go from it. The normal pattern would be that it would be used twice on a Sunday, but we would not be in a position to control hours. So these commitments, given that the applicant is Neil Mackay and Company, we're looking at an application for a building that would be used as a church for a congregation, not a specific congregation.
You happy with that, Ian?
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate what you're saying, Morag, and I understand what you're saying. With regard to traffic, I still don't understand how this 50-metre stretch, which is immediately outside the church, is going to alleviate any problems between the church and the main road. That is quite a distance of single-track road that people are going to get stuck in, I would imagine. So I'm just not convinced yet. Thank you.
Is this a material planning consideration or not, Mrs Ferguson?
The concerns regarding the road are a legitimate planning consideration. Yeah. Members are entitled to make their views known on what roads have looked at it. We've taken the advice of roads. We've placed weight on that. It's for members to consider themselves what their views are on the road.
Okay, thank you.
Road safety is a material planning consideration.
Good. Okay, Councillor McNeill.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much, the Planning Department, for this extensive report and presentation. My main concerns, like my fellow members, seem to be the road and access. However, when I think about most churches that I know of, the islands, they are on single track roads, and that balances. However, I am not so familiar with Stanish at all. And can I request that we have a site visit? You know, so we can visualise better what the local conditions are and check out the layout.
That's a formal request for a site visit from yourself,
Yes,
Councillor McNeill. Okay, I'll seek opinion from board members. Councillor Thompson? Helpful. Councillor MacLeod? Councillor Macaulay? Councillor Mackenzie? Vice Chair? Very good. Well, I think I'll follow on from Councillor McNeill's request that we will hold a site visit. Just to remind members that any site visit will be unaccompanied. Unaccompanied, yeah. Remind members that the site visit is still a formal part of today's meeting, and that during the site inspection there should be no discussion about the merits of the case with the applicant or any other party present, as this may prejudice the proper consideration of the application. And just to inform members of the board, we shall now adjourn this meeting and reconvene at 12:30. Following the site visit. Following the site visit. Thank you. The planning board for Wednesday, the 6th of December 2023. For the benefit of the minute, we have just returned from our site visit to Stanish. And at this moment, I wish to ask members formally whether you have enough information before you now to make a decision on this item today. Yep, all members in agreement. Thank you. So further to that, do members have any more questions to our officers from the planning department relating to this item? No. Well, as you're aware, the recommendation within this report is that planning be approved, subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1 to this report. Are members content with that being the decision of this meeting? Councillor Thompson.
I'm not content with it, Chair. I've got concerns about it not contributing to placemaking, and I've got concerns about the road as well.
Councillor Thompson, do you wish to put forward an amendment?
Yes, to reject.
Okay. And on what grounds would you like to object to this recommendation?
That it doesn't contribute to placemaking and the consideration of road safety.
Okay. Can I now ask Mr. Tim Langley to comment on the legalities of that?
To my knowledge, Chair, those are valid grounds for an amendment.
Okay. Does Councillor Thompson have a seconder to that amendment? Councillor Macaulay.
Yes, Chair, I'll second that.
Thank you. Okay. With that, do we have anyone formally wishing to move the recommendation within the report? No. Okay. I wish to therefore formally enact timeout protocol so that Councillor Thompson and Councillor Macaulay can decide on the wording to this decision. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Now I hereby reconvene this meeting of the Planning Board, and I wish to invite Clerk of the Board, Mr Derek Mackay, to read out the draft amendment.
That the application be refused on the basis that the proposed development does not demonstrate a satisfactory quality of placemaking, siting, scale and design that respect and reflect positive local characteristics and will complement or enhance the surrounding built and natural environment, contrary to policy PD1 of the Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan and policy 14, Design, Quality and Place of National Planning Framework 4, and the additional volume of traffic which would be produced by the development adds weight to this consideration.
Are members happy with that wording? That is therefore the decision of the meeting. I hereby close the meeting for today. Wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and see you next year. Thank you.